Hi, Adriana. Welcome to the Women Waken podcast.
Hey, Whitney. So happy to be here.
So wonderful to have you and so excited to talk about you and your work and some of your current projects, which I am so excited about and that are so amazing. Adriana, you and I connected, I think about a year ago, and we're kind of drawn to one another because your work is really based a lot in a creative approach to healing, specifically with addiction recovery and with trauma, which is a huge part of my work as a therapist. So I was really excited that you are, because you're an expressive arts therapist. So you do
Correct.
a lot of that channeling of that powerful energy into expressive arts, which is beautiful, which is such a fantastic thing.
Thank you. Thank you. I do love my work. I feel very blessed to be able to do what I do and also have the recovery angle, as you said, that we get to share that. And that's something that is a very intense at times, but also such a vital place to work with people.
Absolutely. It's very strong, a very powerful thing. And you're actually my first guest who shares a history of addiction recovery and sobriety. So that's exciting. I mean, it's one of my favorite topics and things to discuss. And I haven't come across a guest yet. And I was kind of trying to seek someone out and thinking, who could I talk to really get into this? And then I recognize that there you are.
Yeah, it's such a strong bond around recovery, right? And I mean, I definitely have a lot of other people I can send you to as well, because there's, as you know, a ton of people out there that are speaking about recovery and want to share their experience, strength, and hope.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's so wonderful. It's so important to talk about. And, I think both you and I both know that a big part of healing and moving into recovery is speaking your truth, speaking your story, and being able to do it freely without feeling like there's, because shame is such a big part of any addiction. And the things that happen within addiction is there's just a lot. There's trauma, there's shame, there's grief, there's loss, there's so much. So the more that we're able to see it as almost an asset, because then it becomes this creative force, right? Where it's like, I can't get rid of what happened to me or what I did. We can't do that, but we can channel it in a different way so that it's for a greater good, a positive force.
Exactly. You said that so well.
And you're doing that. You're doing that.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about, kind of give us a snapshot of your work right now, your life, and definitely share about this new documentary film that you've created that is just magnificent, and I get to see soon at the festival that you're having.
Yeah. Well, got a snapshot of my work right now. I mean, it's multi-layered, right? I'm like, this morning I just saw a client, so I work with clients about 2.5 days a week. I'm seeing people one-on-one, and I operate as a arts therapist, as a somatic, also kind of body-based therapist. I help people with stress and mindfulness in addition to creative work, and also a creative coach. Like, I do a lot of supervision and coaching with people, and working with people with addiction, grief, and trauma. And just in general, I work with a lot of creatives, a lot of people who really want to have somebody that understands both, like, the mental health, emotional support, and also how do they thrive in their creative lives. So that's my angle. And then I teach. Like, tomorrow I'm doing a workshop at, I'm teaching, it's like a visioning workshop for people for the new year with expressive arts, and I'm working on film and doing my own art at the same time. So it's a grand juggling act, shall we say. a lot happening. So yeah.
And how long have you been juggling these various outlets and offerings? It's quite
Well, I guess ever since I started in my career doing this work, I mean, my background is in art and photography, mixed media, and I got my BA in studio art. And so originally I was just going to be an artist. I was like, I'm going to be an artist, and this is going to be my life. And I had day jobs like secretary. Remember secretary jobs? I feel like that's not even a term people use anymore. I was a secretary.
I know, it's funny. I just think that was the greatest job ever. My dad's a doctor, and you remember Take Your Daughter to Work Day?
Yeah, sure.
And he
Yeah.
took me in, and I thought his secretary was the coolest thing ever. I was like, you just get to answer phones and take notes, and it just, oh my gosh, I thought it was the best.
I know, and I was like typing. I was like, I did transcription and, had to learn how to type really fast and did temp jobs. And so a lot
Yeah.
of those kind of
Well,
jobs I
it's a
hated.
great option. When was that? Was that back in like early days in like, before college, during college? Like when did you first know you wanted to pursue this life as an artist?
Uh, I think it definitely started in college. So well, it started before that. I was doing photography classes in high school, and I was not really into art per se. Like I never thought about it that it was viable for me in high school. But when I got into college, and I already had this love of photography, and I started doing different things. Like I had odd jobs doing photography, like in the dark room of the school newspaper, and I did stuff for the art classes. I would take pictures of slides, and I guess the art classes really were resonating with me the most. Like I felt like, oh yeah, this is where my excitement is. And so my parents were like, no, not art. Not art. I'm like, oh well. And I just pushed full force into it, and yeah, I mean, it was really clear that it's where I wanted to go at the time, but I just didn't know how to make a viable living at it. So I always kind of had the day jobs and did it on the side. Yeah, so
And then you're also a movement educator, which is dance, right? It's
yeah,
dance as therapeutic dance as an outlet for,
yeah.
again, energy and expression. And did you dance since early on in life? Since back then, were you also doing that?
No, not at all. No dancing. I mean, sure, like there was a little bit of like shaking it, right? So in college and loved going to parties and going to the clubs and I was a big music fan growing up, huge music fan. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Basically, I was
Oh,
born in DC and we moved around a lot as a kid. And but a lot of my formative years were in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a huge music town. Right. There's not a whole lot there, but there's a lot of music and all the bands would come through Cleveland. And so I was.
isn't that where the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is?
Yes. Where
Yeah.
the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is. Yeah. Which didn't happen until I left Cleveland, but when I went back and visited, I was like, this is cool. It's very it just has this vibe of and kind of edgy vibe. And there's all these hidden and wonderful places to go see music. And so that was a big thing growing up. So I loved to go and listen to music and just groove as a kid. And we saw all the 80s bands and just we would dress up crazy. So I always I think there was always this creative streak, and I had creative friends. But dancing actually didn't arrive until recovery when I found my body. Basically, when I dropped into my body and started doing a lot more healing, because I think I was just walking around I was just a head on a body, but not really, it didn't really register who I was fully. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a long time to relearn or to learn for the first time your connection with your body and your relationship with it.
Yes.
I remember when I first got sober, I had a pretty rough detox. I had to go in and see a psychiatrist. And, I was sitting there just miserable with my arms folded and didn't want to hear anything he had to say. And he asked me, he said, well, what's your relationship with your body? Or he said something like, it doesn't sound like you have a very good relationship with your body. Cause I was kind of sharing my history. I have a history of eating disorder as well as addiction. And I thought, like, what does that mean? My relationship with my body? Like, you don't need a relationship with your body. It's just there. And it's that kind of thinking that makes us so disconnected, because for years when you're in an addiction, you're treating your body like a garbage can and have no consideration for it or what you're putting into it or doing to it. So yeah, and I'm a dancer as well. So it's a beautiful way to get back into your body and notice that you do have a body, that it's there, and it's wanting to move and to be expressed and to be connected with you, to be heard and seen. And that can just be so hard, because the problem is that our relationship with our body can be kind of inconvenient when we want to do things that are self-destructive.
Very true. Very true. That's a great way to say it. Yeah. Yeah. And just to override the body. I mean, I think a lot of addiction is that. It's about overriding the body. And trying to escape in some way, or pretend. Like avoidance is such a big part of it, denial. And so how to register, like, oh, I have needs, I'm hungry, I'm tired. I mean, that's why there's that big thing of HALT in 12 step, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired, which is
Ah.
that you pause and learn how to do those basic things for yourself.
Ah, absolutely. Listening to your body's needs, recognizing that you can't just keep plowing through and doing exactly what you want to do, that the halt helps, because you literally have to halt and say, okay, what's going on here? And like you said, does my body need more rest than I'd like? Does it need something to eat? Does it, just really that, connection. So
Mm.
it's wonderful that you found that through dance. When was it about? Would you want to share a little bit about your story, about kind of when did addiction occur for you, and when did you kind of move out of it and go into recovery?
Yeah. I mean, I talk about it. I mean, I feel like this is always where it goes when I'm on a podcast or an interview, right? Is because it's so much a part of the story for me.
Ah,
And I think for many of us, right, we go through our own journey first. We have our own crises first, and then, especially in the helping profession, and then we learn, okay, so now my experience can support others. So that's definitely how it went for me. I mean, I drank mainly. I was a drinker. I dabbled in weed, now they call it. At the time, I guess it was, what do we call it back then? I guess it was pot, or marijuana. But I dabbled in it, but I hated it. It would always make me feel insane. Like I would hallucinate whenever I would smoke. It was
yeah.
just, I had a very weird relationship, and I think it's because I have a very, very sensitive system. So alcohol was the perfect combination of, okay, I'm going to calm down that anxiety that's always there for me, like take the edge off. But it also would help lift me out of depression or a feeling of melancholy. It was this elixir for me that was a double. It would just do the right things for the right moment. Um, and I grew up Catholic and very Roman Catholic. So I'm on my dad's side Italian American, and so I had a certain, this is the right way you have to be the good girl and all that. And I think I felt pretty trapped on some level in the way, even though my parents were very liberal and there was a lot of, I don't know, they were free folks on some level, but then there was also this feeling of, I think I always wanted to break out. And so alcohol gave me that opportunity to feel more just uncensored. It could be uncensored, and I could play, and I was very promiscuous, and it just pushed me into realms and pushed me into environments I wouldn't have gone before. But I think it also was definitely a regulator. So it helped me manage all the inside stress that I was feeling, and I was prone to, like I said, depression and definitely anxiety. So yeah, I was also connected to my art, right? I mean, that
When you were
art.
using?
Yeah. It's just, for me, it was this whole identity that all of a sudden here I am. I'm studying art, I'm taking pictures, I'm smoking cigarette. I wasn't a big smoker, but it just felt like it was almost this cool, like I'm smoking cigarettes, rolling, doing the rolling paper, and I'm hanging out and with my friends and staying up late drinking and party, and I would sometimes smoke in the dark room, and I just felt like it was creating this environment, and this part of me got to come out and really um, just feel different in a positive
You feel
way.
cool.
Beginning.
You feel like
Yeah.
you're into this stuff, and you're in your element, and you're very fancy, and it can be, there's so much illusion to that time. It's such, I find that in addiction, so there's things that masquerade as different things. Like I think of, before, when you're talking about freedom, it's so ironic that when you first start using, there's a sense of freedom. It's like, finally, I feel like me. I feel like I can come out of my shell. I feel like I can talk. And I imagine the most challenging thing is for artists, because you feel like, I found my elixir. Like this brings out, I can go for hours and just get so much creative art out there when I'm, using. but it is a masquerade, because eventually the illusion goes away, because the thing that first frees you then has a hold on you, because then you're beholden to these, this addiction to these substances. And then the same thing where at first you feel kind of cool, like in this, like, I had this whole thing going on. I'm sophisticated, I smoke and I use, and I'm, artistic. And then you recognize that it's all kind of borrowed time, if that's the right word. Like it doesn't really belong to you, because you're sort of, it's synthetic. You're using something to achieve that state. And I think that's one of the scariest parts of addiction, is the first time you recognize that, where it's like, I need this, right? Like I can't be without this, and that's jarring. And, it's kind of like that monkey on your back, where you're like, oh, something's going to keep coming back and reminding me that this isn't just me. This is a dependency that's being developed. And it's scary.
Yeah. It took me a long time I'm saying it took me a long time to get there, and it didn't really, because I got sober young, but I didn't have any idea that it was a problem. I mean, I really didn't. I didn't have any orientation to it. I just felt like this is what everyone's doing around me, and it's helping me. And I always thought other things were the problem, but the drinking didn't seem to be like, well, I'm not that out of control. And maybe I throw up sometimes, or I get a lot of hands sometimes, or I wake up hungover, and no big deal. And seemed like overall I was managing my life, until I started having panic attacks. I started having all these things go on, and I just kept pushing it down, until, I mean, the first time, I like that you say that, like the first time that I realized it, I think I had moved to San Francisco, and where my artist's career was going to take off, of course. Everything's going to happen now, and living in that sort of future, like, well, now this is going to do it, or that what is it called, like geographics, right, when you jump around. So
you move
this place will do it, this relationship will do it, this opportunity is going to do it. And I moved here into the Mission district of San Francisco, which is at the time, I mean, that was back in 1992. I guess I moved here in 1992. And the Mission District was, I mean, mainly just a Latin American community, right? A lot of people from Mexico. And it was actually not a very safe neighborhood at the time either, especially for a young, probably white woman, a little moving around with a lot of naivete. But I moved right into the heart of the Mission, and one of my roommates was sober. And that was kind of the first time. And he actually, I remember there was a moment when I had this temp job. I left early. I was having all this anxiety. I came home, and I was standing in the hallway drinking a beer. It was probably like 3 in the afternoon or something. And he walked by me, and I said, I really need this. And he just looked at me, he's like, yeah, of course you do. And he just kept walking. And I felt kind of embarrassed, but I was like, all right. I felt kind of embarrassed, but it sort of jolted me into that, that I had responded like, I need this. And it had gotten to the point where I started really having consequences that led to my recovery. So, yeah.
And that was you said 23 when you were?
I was 23 when I moved here, and I got sober at 24 when I was 24.
Oh, wow. So it escalated pretty quickly in that year. Then I guess San Francisco will do that, in that kind of lifestyle where, when your lifestyle is conducive to using and drinking when you want, it can quickly get out of hand into a dark place. What was the point for you that you recognized that this wasn't something that was going to work for you?
Well, I part of what had happened, I'll just sort of make it brief, because there's a lot to it, but one of my moments of clarity was, I think that was one of them, what I just shared, but also the Rodney King riots were happening down in Los Angeles. And I already was feeling some culture shock. I mean, I had lived in Ohio, and then I lived in Minneapolis for a short time, and then moved here. I had some friends here, and I was just trying to get my bearings overall. And then the Rodney King riots were happening down in LA, and I had been out to friends, and I had been drinking, and I drove home after curfew, because there was a curfew at the time, and it filtered up to San Francisco. And I ended up getting assaulted right in front of my doorstep. And they stole my bicycle. Luckily, they didn't steal my camera, which was in my backpack. And I got beat up pretty badly. Not like, not enough to go to the hospital badly, but badly to be really shook up. And so that to me was, I thought I was going to die. And I was, I couldn't, part of what happened is because I was drunk and I couldn't get my key in the door. And, all of the, like, it was a whole combination of perfect storm. And so I started having a lot of post-traumatic stress symptoms from that. And I was working at this art gallery with these two women that ran the gallery, and they really encouraged me to go and get some help. And so I started seeing a low-fee therapist at the time. Actually, it's like the place that I went is like right around the corner from where I live now. And that woman, she was into Buddhism. She was studying a lot of meditation, and she was very mature. I was really lucky to get she was an intern, but she was very mature, and she just helped me look at my alcoholism. It took a while. She wore me down over a year's time, and I was doing control drinking and this and that and trying to manage it. And she helped me to finally go to my first 12-step meeting. So that, that's part of what got me into recovery. And then also a good friend who was a drug and alcohol counselor at the time, that she also helped me a lot too. So that was kind of how it happened, how I got here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I kind of did the same process of, I got into therapy while I was still using. And it was, for me, I was pretty resistant to stop. I mean, towards the end, I recognized I had to. I got addicted to pills in addition to alcohol, and that really just makes things go south really quickly. Yes. So I was so scared by how dependent I'd become on them that I just wanted out. And so then I was more willing to listen. But until then, I did the same bargaining. And I remember my therapist telling me once, because I would come to her with all these stories about kind of what you said, like there was promiscuity, there was bad decisions, there was drunk driving, there was, just unfortunate events that kept occurring. And I would always try to play it off because, I too was through my 20s when my drinking was at its heaviest and using. And there's a lot of it just feels like this is, it's par for the course. Like you're in your 20s, of course you're going to be, if you can drink a beer at 3, you're going to do it. And if you're going to go, I used to black out a lot, and I was like, well, that's just what we do. I mean, I had, friends in college and afterwards where, the next morning we kind of share our stories about like, oh, like who blacked out, who didn't, who can like share, what actually happened last night. And we'd laugh about it. It really gets normalized in those years, I think, to have problematic drinking. And that's why it becomes such a personal decision, because we're the only ones that can decide how we feel about it. And if we feel that something needs to change, because, and I think it's different than, because, obviously we've both been in the room. So we know that some people's life literally tanks. I mean, they have people around them. Sometimes they don't have a choice. They're put into, but it's different when your life is just not working, but it's working just enough that you could keep going and keep using. But for me, and it sounds like for you, there was something inside that said, I don't think I could be the person I want to be if I keep doing this, if I keep using. Because to me, some of the biggest things were a lack of respect. I couldn't respect myself when I drank. I couldn't really be the person that I want to be, which is thoughtful and, considerate and responsible. So I couldn't respect myself, and also I couldn't trust myself. I think those were the two biggest things. It's scary when, because I'm sure you did this too, but with like controlled drinking, when you say, okay, I'm not going to black out anymore. Not going to go home with anybody anymore. I'm not going to have more than 3 drinks on these nights. And I would break every rule every time. And I'd wake up the next morning like, oh, dang it, I did it again. Mm-hmm. So I lost trust and respect, and that really scared me. Yes. And that was enough for me to finally say, I think I need to break up with these substances. As much as I've tried to have a relationship with them, and it very much, I say often, addiction is like a toxic relationship where, and I tell people this who are in recovery, that I think it's important to not just, condemn the whole experience, but you have to acknowledge that when you get sober, when you recover, it's a loss. You're saying bye to something that served you in some way and that you did have a relationship with. again, just like a toxic relationship, anyone who's had to get out of an unhealthy relationship knows that it's not just like, oh, good, that's over. It hurts. Like there's pain, there was connection that was created, there was deep feelings that were involved, even if and it's almost worse because then you have to wrap your mind around, oh man, a lot of that was just manipulation and really contorted, views and perspectives on what I thought was a good thing. And the same goes with addiction. At some point it feels like a good thing, just like you shared earlier, where at first you're like, great, I found my juice, I found my flow, I found my thing that works for me, that makes me feel good. And having to let that go is there's a grieving process involved.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I also, there's such a different dynamic getting into recovery younger. And at the time, I mean, I just felt also like, I don't know, maybe it's really not a problem. Maybe I'm just young and I've just been playing around and it's not really, like maybe I'm not an alcoholic or et cetera, et cetera. Maybe I'm not, maybe this isn't really an addiction. And so I really struggled at the beginning to kind of own that or really allow myself to fully move into the process of recovery, even though I started getting help and going to meetings and those kind of things. But I had been fired from a job. I mean, there's so many things that happened because of my drinking. I mean, my relationship to intimate relationships were really just, they were just such a mess. And I could figure out how to make a living. I was directionless. I was really, I mean, there was so much soul lost for me. I think ultimately, I mean, I can vividly remember I was doing martial arts. That's another thing I think that helped me get into recovery that I forget sometimes, because when I was assaulted, I was like, I got to do something. I got to feel safer. I got to feel safer in the world. This is not okay what happened. I needed to fight back somehow. And so I started doing martial arts, and I'm really, sometimes impressed that I was able to do that for myself at the time. And my teacher really, he was wonderful. And I started meditating through that process. And I think all of that, it just started tipping the scales, because I remember walking in the Lower Haight where I was living at the time and was doing this controlled drinking and really not, drinking that much, but feeling on the edge. And I felt so depressed. I mean, I really drinking was so much better than not drinking, even though drinking wasn't working for me anymore. It would almost make me feel worse. But I just remember that feeling of soul loss, and I think I had just been fired from this job I was working at, partly because of my drinking, and it just felt like such a emptiness inside, and I was done. I was really done. And so I'm grateful, right? Because I got that rebirth like you too, at a really young age, and got to start my life. I mean, it took a while to get moving.
Oh yeah. Well, you're so, like we said, you're so disconnected, both from your body, but as you described, it is sort of this, this soul loss, and which is a whole thing. Like the energy of your soul is, it has like a higher vibration, lower vibration, and also there's, people say that your soul can kind of leave your body if you're really treating it poorly, and they call it actually this silver cord, I think is the term, where it's that your soul never leaves you entirely, but it will kind of like drift away, like kind of like, I'm getting out of here if you're, again, like toxic and unhealthy and all these things. And so it can, kind of move out of your body. And that's how it feels. I mean, I think anyone can relate who's had like a heavy night of drinking, and the next day you wake up and you just feel this god awful, both physically, but just again, like in your soul, it's just like, oh God, I feel, and when I was doing stuff like sleeping around and everything, it's, that you're conducting yourself in a way that's not, again, conducive to love. It's self-destructive.
Yeah.
The way to really, it's escapism, but it's also, kind of masochism. It's really hurting yourself. And at the moment, it feels like this almost like powerful thing, and you want this attention, but the next day it's like you kind of sold yourself to get this feeling, and you have to sit with the repercussions. And it's so uncomfortable that, that's when I would use again. Like I had many mornings where I would wake up horrifically hungover, and I would just start drinking because I was like, I can't sit with this feeling. It's too uncomfortable. I have to feel good again. Which is, again, a whole other thing about addiction is just not wanting to feel bad. You don't want to feel uncomfortable. You don't want to feel pain emotionally or physically.
Yeah.
So back to the soul cord is that, I remember when I first got sober, I was in a group. It was actually I was getting I was doing my practicum to be a therapist, and it was a consult group, and we were passing around these, it was the end of the year, we were passing around these little like oracle cards, like you picked a card. And at that time, now I'm a tarot reader and I'm into all that, but at the time I was like, okay, whatever, what is this? And I pulled one, and it said, it's time to take the first step back to yourself. And this was when I was just at the bottoming out of my use. And that did connect with me, because that was the first time I thought, that's what it feels like. I feel like my soul left my body and is like 10 miles down the road. And I often use that term in addiction is the long walk back to yourself, because it's that point where you've basically gone as far as you can, your cord is, pulling, and you have to turn around and take that first terrifying, daunting task of, all right, well, I got this far away. All I can do is go start that walk back, and that's such a low place. And that's why I love working with people in addiction, because the biggest thing you need is just a little bit of reassurance that there is a way back, and it is possible, that you're not going to be lost forever, out, disconnected from yourself, feeling terrible, physically, mentally, emotionally, that it gets better. And often, in increments, like, it's not like you have to get all the way back in your body to feel good. It's like, I remember the first day when I had gotten sober, that it was like this light. I had that a little bit of like a flicker. I was like, ooh, I feel myself. I feel my soul. I feel that spark coming back. And then it would go away and I'd be depressed again. But, it's sort of it comes back gradually and in little moments as you work back to yourself.
Yeah. And there's all these touchstones along the way too. I mean, as you were saying that, when I was working at this printing graphic design company, and the woman that ran the company, when she fired me, she gave me, this is so crazy, it's such a San Francisco thing, she gave me the book Woman Who Run with the Wolves, right? I mean, it must have been new at the time. I swear that book must have just come out or something, by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, right? Which is such a classic now. But she gave me that book, and I was like, okay, whatever. And I remember laying on my couch in my place in the Lower Haight and reading it, and reading the story about the red shoes. Do you know that story about the red shoes? It's this folk, it's like a folk story that is, I think, connected to the Little Match Girl, and which is, she's this tattered soul. She's this tattered young girl who's like living on the streets, and she gets these red shoes, and she starts wearing them, and she can't, and it's so amazing at first. It's like, oh, I have these red shoes, and they make me dance, and they make me do this, and they make me do that, but then over time, the red shoes like become this compulsion for her, and she can't get them off, and she's just dancing as fast as she can, and it ends up like to her demise. It's the red shoes. And I remember that story, and she like unpacked it about addiction and how it related, and I felt it was like just the touchstone of like, oh my God, I have to wake up, right? And then, like you said, this cord, like, how do we find that thread back to ourselves? And I think that, yeah, it's kind of this ongoing practice, right, of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I don't know if you found this, but I definitely, it's common to hear about in recovery that, once I got, because you said, I did the same thing where I was like, do I really have a problem? Am I really an addict? Maybe I just have too much fun with alcohol. Maybe I'm just too, I just get a little, overzealous at times. But then I was sure when I got sober, because they call it whack-a-mole, right, in recovery, where it was like, then when I first got sober, my eating stuff came up, and, other just different addictions. And I could find anything to get addicted to, whether it was exercise or weight obsession, or obsession with a person, or if there's so many things. And I was like, okay, clearly there's something. It wasn't the drinking, it wasn't the pills, it's something, it's this thing deep down in there that's just looking to seek something outside of me to get relief. Right. And that's what needs to be addressed. It always comes down to that core thing where it's like, what is actually going on with me, that I'm engaging in these things to try and soothe something. Yeah. And so that can be, that's challenging to face too. And for me, it's, it just becomes a part of life where you just start to recognize like, oh, okay, I'm seeking this out. And, cause even, nowadays addiction comes in so many forms, and it's even about, validation is a huge addiction. And unfortunately now there's a million different ways because of social media and otherwise to get this, validation that people become addicted to. So you can pulled into anything that just because it kicks in the same thing, like those red shoes. Like first it was alcohol, but then you find your other thing where you're like, oh, well, this feels really good and I can't get enough of this. And it's like, oh, shoot, maybe this is becoming a problem too.
Never ends.
Yeah.
Never ends.
Just like
You
lock
know.
myself up. I can't engage, just, become the Buddha and not engage in anything, because anything I touch, I'm going to turn into a abusive situation.
I know, I know. Yeah. Wow, it's great to talk about, it's great to talk about the addiction actually, but the recovery journey, right? Because what a process it is.
It is. It is. Let's hear how you, as you moved, I mean, you're just in your 20s. So then you got sober early. So as you kind of found yourself, and is that when your career started as, as an artist, as an art therapist?
Yeah. Well, as an artist, everything kind of just collapsed when I got sober. I mean, I really, because I just had to get sober. I just had to do the basic things of learning how to live life without drinking one day at a time. And I also had a lot of internal cleanup to do. And so I think after about a year sober, I started really struggling with depression. I had to move a bunch of times and was trying to find my footing. I was trying to make money and, just trying to get all the basics in order. And my art life just, went underground. I didn't know how to do it and felt very lost. And so I started being more focused on, I did a lot of, like visual diaries. I would do these collages and just find ways to express what was going on with me. I think I was doing a little bit of that before I got into recovery, but I was sort of in the passageway from addiction to recovery. But it felt very therapeutic. Like it wasn't about showing it. It wasn't about exhibiting. It wasn't about, doing anything and out in the world. It was really for me. And that's what I was learning. I was learning to heal. I was learning to figure out how to do the internal work. So then all of a sudden I thought, maybe I want to learn about this as a profession. So I started looking into art therapy and looking into different schools here in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I landed on this class this woman was doing, and it was called body portraits, I think, or something to that effect. And it was going through the body parts and exploring through movement and visual art and writing. And so I started doing this work with her, and it was very special. And her name was Helene. And I was just learning about myself in this creative way. And then she told me about the Tamalpa Institute, which is this movement-based expressive arts therapy institute in Marin County. And she told me about it, and it sparked my interest. And so that was kind of where I decided to go. And I arrived there, and it's just this quite amazing spot, because Anna Halpern, she just passed recently. She was 100 when she died. It's this dancer choreographer, and her daughter, Daria Halpern, and they created this school that was in just this gorgeous studio under the redwoods, and that since the 60s they had been really creating dance around social justice and around just coming together, learning about the body. Like all these poets and different people would come, and then it became an institute. So I went up there and really had a San Francisco experience, really, a California experience of finding my body. And I worked with this group of international students, and that was how I really entered into the field of expressive arts, and again found my body. It was like all of a sudden I felt dance was this excitement for me, and I started learning art from this more personal healing perspective, and then I just kept going. Like I really just kept going, and decided early on that I would focus on recovery, that I was going to help other people in recovery. And so it all just came together. I mean, sure, of course there was a lot of things along the way that contributed to the process, but that's how I landed in that. And that was 4 years in recovery when I started doing that. So I already had some foundation, and I think that was good for me, because I don't know if I could have done that if I had at the beginning. I think I was too raw. I would have been too overwhelmed by it, I think, at the beginning. So
Yeah, absolutely. Those first few years are tough.
yeah.
And I always would tell people that first year of recovery, that's what you're doing. You're in recovery for that first year, because I know I did this, and people have a tendency that it's like, okay, well, that's done. So what am I doing now? I need to be doing more. I need to be, exercising or focusing on my work. And it's fine to engage in those things, but I always remind people, like, just that's your main occupation right now, is getting sober, because it's such a huge thing. It's so giant to make that decision, to make that change in your life, to actually move from a life of using to a life of sobriety. That in and of itself, like, if you just focus on that, that'll take most of your energy, and it's going to need most of your energy. So it's important not to, dilute it too much and to put it, into too many other endeavors
Yes.
at first.
Yeah. And that's, I think that especially these days, I mean, there's so many distractions, right? There's so many distractions. It's hard also because we've been living in this online world. But I really was able to immerse myself in it. I was really able to just surround myself by recovering people, and I think that was vital for me. I needed a whole new community. The old community was just, I didn't have the support. I mean, I knew a lot of artists and poets, and there was a lot of people that I knew, people that opened bars. I was an art curator at a bar when I got sober, but I had to separate myself from all that, and I think it took time. Right? It takes time to groove into this new way of being. So.
Yeah. And there's also the aspect that, that first year, even for a few years, you're really literally thawing out. I mean, you really just kind of, ice off all of your emotions, and you don't know how to, you've spent years numbing your emotions. So it's like you have these things coming back to life, and it's like, what is this? This is and I remember thinking, like, I'm supposed to just sit here with this feeling, like, this feels terrible. I feel like there's this strong emotion and I can't run away from it. I have to it was the hardest thing to learn, how to sit with it.
Yes.
And really feel it, and not try to escape it, and not try to find something to soothe it. And it's like, wow, this is uncomfortable, and it hurts. And for any of us who have trauma in our background, or grief and loss, sitting with those things and having to really look at it and acknowledge it is very painful the first time you have to face it sober. And that also is having the capacity for that in those first few years is so important.
Yeah. And having tools, right? Having a lot of tools to do it. And I often tell people in my work, because I work with a lot of people who have very sensitive nervous systems, just like I do, and that we have to do it little bits at a time. And I think that, I don't know, also I feel like so much has evolved in therapy and somatics and recovery over time. It just felt like the wilderness a little bit at that time. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but in some ways, I mean, it was 20, almost 29 years ago. I mean, it was a different world. And but I think now there's just so many resources, there's so many tools, there's so much experience that people have they can share. And I also feel like part of even doing the work that I do is supporting other creative people, because I didn't feel like I had that. I didn't have people around me that necessarily could say, hey, welcome, artist in recovery. Like, this is going to be its own journey, and here's some ways to handle it. Here's some ways to organize around it. Because I felt like there were no role models at the time that I knew of.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that you found your way towards that community and started finding all these different outlets that really resonated with you and helped you in your healing process and reconnecting with your body. And then as I imagine that, like, once you kind of immerse yourself in that, that's kind of what created the impetus to be like, I want to do this. I want to help people the way that these people are helping me, which again is a lot of part of the recovery journey. Is I want to use this to aid others who are have to walk this same path and have these same struggles. So what were your first steps towards, like, your own work? Once you moved, I guessing like your late 20s into your 30s, where you're like, I want to make a career of this. I'm an artist. I'm talented. I have things to offer. I want to start doing that.
Yeah, I through the institute, they had you do a lot of practice, right? And just like any training program, like I know sure you did with your therapy program too. And so we started doing practice sessions with people. So I started doing one-on-one with some of the students, actually, because then first year student, and then you come in and support the students that are going through the training. So I started doing some practice sessions, which I really loved right away. I thought, oh, I like this. I like doing this one-on-one work with people. And then I had to do a project. And so my project was doing, it was called Mask. What was it called exactly? Something about, I don't remember the exact title, but it was surrounding mask as a metaphor for addiction, and then the idea of the unmask, or what's underneath the mask, as the metaphor for recovery, which I still play with sometimes because I love that concept. But so I did a workshop, and I got people to come, and we just offered an expressive arts experience. And I think, God, I was just at the end of my training, so I was probably close to 30 at the time. And then I went in and got a master's in psychology. So I kind of kept going, and through that, I just started offering things. I was just really like, I'm just going to do this. I'm excited about this. I want to share this with people. So I kept working with people in recovery, and I started doing little stints at treatment centers. I would go in and I would offer, a series of workshops or a class. And so I started doing that really right at the beginning, and just kept going. I kept going because it felt like this works. And I would post things on Craigslist because that was just starting, and I would post flyers around the city, and I would have people come. They would come and join me, and I had a recovery network, so I also would find ways to let people in my network know, and it just started growing. It just started growing from there, and I had to do things. Still had to do a lot of day jobs. So I found a lot of different things I could do to kind of get going, stay afloat while I built my work, built my practice. And so that's kind of what happened. And it was hard in a lot of ways, right? It's hard because there was no map for it. There really wasn't a map, but I just kept following my nose, and just seeing what opportunities came. And I also really, I don't know, I just had so much passion for it. I mean, I still do. I had a lot of passion for it. And my husband, because I married somebody, I had a long, 12-year relationship with someone in recovery, and he was so supportive, and he was a jazz musician, and that was his like love, was jazz. And he just also helped me, and he was a meditator. And so we started doing these retreats, yearly retreats for people in recovery in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Oh,
And yeah,
yeah.
where you're from, yeah. And so that started happening. So I built a niche, and people started knowing that that was something that I was doing. And
That's so great. And it's so inspiring, encouraging to hear, because sometimes that's the way things get, I mean, that's always how the way things get started. You just do it. Because I love how you said, like, I wanted to do it, so I just did it. I know I'm first at this place professionally where, I'm a licensed therapist, so I obviously do that, but there's so many other little things. Like, I'd love to do more recovery and healing work, and just little things that are kind of offshoots, but I'm kind of stuck in that, like, well, where do you start? Because I have, sort of my base work to rely on. But sometimes it's when you're in that place where you just have to do it and just start, that it just kind of takes on a life of its own. And these things that, when it's our soul's calling, when it's something that we truly just feel a yearning to do, it tends to work out and it'll come together. And it sounds like that's what happened for you, because you're offering something that people want and are needing. And that's always going to work out and come around.
yeah. And I mean, I think I have a strong drive, which sometimes is good and sometimes is not great for me, because I can push myself hard. And maybe it's also the addiction at play at times. Like I have to temper my workaholism, because I've always done a lot. I've always pushed hard. And except for, I mean, there's been times where I've gone through depression and I've felt lost. And so I've had some periods of that. But generally, I've just been, I go for it. And I've learned how to also be a businesswoman. I really had to learn how to be a businesswoman, and just, there was not tools for that necessarily where I went to school. they weren't really showing you how to market yourself. So I had to fly by the seat of my pants, and really get like the ins and outs of like, how do you do this? And I'm still learning. I feel like I'm still learning.
Yeah, well, it's an ever evolving thing. I mean, once you kind of become, a business owner, a businesswoman, a business person, and you're out there creating this, whatever you want to call it, your broader vision, your broader empire. I mean, that's essentially what it becomes, because you're overseeing all these beautiful little, it's like this garden. Empire is basically this garden of things that you've planted and are now growing, but you have to tend to it, and it's never finished. Just like it's art, it's never finished. There's always more to grow, which is the beautiful thing about creativity, is that there's no like ceiling to it. You can always, because you can make a new little, shift or change in one offering, and it's a whole nother plant and expression. So yeah,
I
I
love
think
that.
there's things to learn. And I imagine, like, as you gain, like, because I would love for you to talk about, you've also gone into film, and you've made these
Yeah.
amazing, incredible documentaries. Well, one was about, sort of more of a personal expression, like a personal art piece about your personal experience with grief. But then you just created The Creative High, which is a documentary, which is just what we're talking about, which is, how people move from addiction and despair into, okay, if I have this energy, how do I channel it towards something greater and expressive, and moving that into beautiful creative performance and art and all of that. So I can't wait to see that documentary. I haven't got to see it yet, but can you tell us about that? Like, how did you move into film, and what is it like to be able to kind of, because it's a real birth when you create something like that, like whether it's a book or a movie, a documentary or anything, it's like, that's a lot of work. You got to first figure out the idea, have like the seedling, and then it gestates, and then you give birth to it, and it's a whole thing. So
The whole thing. It's a whole thing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I think, how the process started is that my husband Eddie, who I was with for 12 years, that he was diagnosed with lung cancer because 2 years into our marriage, because we had been together for 8 years, and we had a very passionate, intense, complicated relationship. And so we got married after 8 years being together. He was older than I was. He had kids, a couple of kids. And so he got diagnosed with lung cancer, and then we went a 2-year process of treatment, and then he eventually passed away. And then when that happened, obviously it was like a whole other, like, okay, now what? It was kind of this whole other chapter of my recovery. My life ended, and I had to figure out how to move into the next very bizarre chapter of going through grief. And that was also another waking up, because I realized, okay, number one, um, I have to start over. I had to leave the house we were living in. There was so many things that had to change. And I felt like I had been giving so much. Like, I had his kids lived with us half time, and so I had these stepkids. Was dealing with his illness. I was doing so much with my work, and I also have this job where I was running this art program as a day job, which was wonderful, but in connection to my practice. And I was just giving and giving and giving, and I didn't feel like I had enough for my own creative life, really. I mean, I felt like I'm mentoring, but I'm not creating. And I was actually doing tango dance at the time, which was a place where I had a 9-year tango life career, and I'd started that with Eddie. And so I just decided that I was starting to write I'd already always written some poetry, but I was writing poetry about the loss and the grief and the process. And then I wanted to create a performance. And so I decided, it was actually 5 years after, about 4 or 5 years after Eddie passed away, that I started moving into this performance process. And I did this whole ritual called performance ritual, because it wasn't like I'm staging this performance. It was really like I'm doing something very internal, and I'm going to have an audience of witnesses. So I hired an amazing choreographer and a dancer, Travis, from the Bay Area, and Erica. And so they came and helped me craft this performance, which was like really reclaiming my own creative life and doing the work that I do with others. How do we heal through art? So I did this performance, and then I decided to document it and make it into a short documentary called When the Fall Comes. And so I created this, and it was such a powerful experience. It was so powerful. And not only was reclaiming my creative life, it was very healing for my grief journey. And I had all these collaborators. I had all these people holding me, supporting me, inspiring me. And I felt like I dove back into my art kind of full force. And so that was the beginning, I think, of where I am now, which I've been making documentary now that was since 2014. So, right, it's been like, I don't know, 9 years or something. I'm on the math, like
8 years.
8 years, 8 years. And I wasn't going to make another film until I had this coach. He was a very interesting guy, and he was like, "You have another film in you. You have another film in you. You're a filmmaker." And I'm like, "Okay." And he just wouldn't stop. Like he's like, "I don't know. I know you're a therapist, but I don't know. I think it's sucking the life out of you, and you got to do more film." And
Oh,
even though making films kind of suck the life out of you in a whole different way, actually,
oh,
it's like so
imagine.
intense. And I don't even he actually helped me start this film, and then he kind of vanished, and then I was like, wait a minute.
Oh, wow,
So
he was just a little like messenger to
he
come in,
was.
to kind of push you. Sometimes that'll happen in life, like that little bird that's like, you got to do this, and then they're gone.
Exactly. He was, and he was very motivating, and he was very encouraging. He was so supportive of me. He just really boosted me in so many ways. And so it took a while, because he's like, "What's the topic of your next film?" And I was like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, like, hello, what have I been doing for the past,
There.
15 years? It's like, yeah, I guess it's going to be art and recovery, and it just was such a no-brainer when I finally dawned on me. So yeah, so it was this whole idea, like, I'm going to set out, I'm going to talk to artists. I'm going to talk to artists who, faced addiction, who are in recovery, and I'm going to talk to them about the creative process, and I'm going to talk to them about this idea of, like, how do we like heal, and through art, and does art heal us in recovery? I just wanted to ask them all those questions and learn about their creative process. And so that's what I did. I just almost naively, again, back to, like, I feel like I set out with, like, this, really bright-eyed, like, "Oh, this is going to be great. We're going to do this in 2 years and it'll be done." And it's 6 years later.
Oh, wow.
6 years later, yeah, it's finally coming into the world. I didn't know if it would ever happen.
That's a long pregnancy. 6 years.
It's Oh my, that's exactly what I've termed it so many times. Like, this baby is so big. I feel like it's never gonna drop, and is it gonna kill me, or am I gonna birth this, right? And so it finally happened, and it's been, I mean, God, it's been its own journey. I mean, there's so many things that have happened during this process.
I can
Yeah.
imagine. Well, it truly is. I mean, it's magic that's happening when people create an art, and that's what I find so incredible about, a book or a movie, where it's something that it takes so much of people. It's like this. It's just this labor of love and energy
Yeah.
and all these things, but then once it's done, it's there. I think
Yeah.
of that every time I watch a movie. I think they spent years on this, but this movie is now 50 years old. But it's for all the effort they put into it. Now it for all of time is there for people to enjoy, to get inspiration, messages, just so much from. So it's like this incredible force. Once you put it out there, it's like, as much as it takes to put into it, it's worth it, right? Because then it's the gift that keeps giving. It just keeps continuously being an offering. And that's, I dream of creating something, whether it's a book or a film, because it's so amazing to offer that, to put that out into the world, especially something like this, because, it's so important for people to know that there is life beyond addiction, and that just because you were addicted doesn't mean that you don't have that your own amazing gift and talent and abilities.
Right.
Because I think it's common for people to get sober and think, well, can I still do this? Do I still have it? Do I still have these gifts? And you hear that a lot about musicians or performers or anybody who, their livelihood was based on using, and then they get sober and it's like, am I going to dry up? Is there anything left, for me to offer? So
Yeah.
it's just, I can't wait to watch it and experience that and hear those stories.
I'm so excited for you to see it, and I'm, we're gearing up to our premiere next Sunday,
Yeah.
next Sunday. And it's the first time that I'll see it on the big screen. So, I mean, that's the other thing, is it's just been virtual the whole time. We've done a few private screenings, like to donors and to our audience that have been following us for so many years. But the fact that we have this in person, like especially with everything we've been through, through this last couple years with COVID. I mean, when we finished the film through COVID, I mean, I have an amazing producer, Diane Griffin, who's really been a collaborator. I always want to name her because, I mean, we're really in it together, and she has 25 years and plus in the business of documentary filmmaking. And you know, like, I think for both of us and our editor Kirk and the artists, because there's 9 different artists and 5 of them are going to come in person to the screening. I mean, the fact like that stuck with us for all this time. You know, I mean, oh, here I am again. Can we come film you? Or hey, we have another question. Or I mean, how patient they've been with the. It's like this. It's something coming to fruition, and now it just exists in the world, and it's going to have a life of its own.
Yeah. Yeah, that and how remarkable, and you know, just such strong respect and, you know, credit to you for all that you put into this, because again, it's just so invaluable to have this resource out there.